what happened in 1975 that led to this Declaration of Independence. This all kicked off, if you like, in April 1974 when there was a significant change of government in Portugal, leading to the possibility of an alternate future for East Timor. And it did not take very long for a number of organisations to express a view about what that future might be. And so we can see here, within a month of that statement or declaration from Lisbon, or events in Lisbon, we've had the appearance of 3, in fact 4 organisations, but the ones we know best are ASDT, which became Fretland, UDT, and then Wadddingham, which favoured integration with Indonesia. I've only just seen, for example, in the last day, this communication that was published in the Portuguese administration newspaper in Timor, A Voz de Timor, as a statement from the Timorese in what was known as the Timorese House, or Casa dos Timores, in Lisbon, people who became quite important and influential in the development of Fretland in particular later on. So the observation to make about this is this happened very quickly in Timor, which tells you, I think, that people hadn't started thinking about it just then, that people had been thinking about these things before this moment, and we see that finding its expression very quickly in Timor. For some, it was a period of great excitement. For others, it was a period of serious worry. I think in Australia, and this is how I want to frame what I say here, what we saw and what we felt we were seeing was something of possibilities, of good possibilities. And so for me, this is what we as people became supporters of independence for East Timor, how we viewed the possibility for Timor at that time. But there were other people in play. And as, again, most of you will know, both in September 1974 and again in April 1975, meetings between our Prime Minister Gough Whitlam and President Suharto, helped along by Ambassador Walcott, who's on the right there, had other ideas about the future of Timor, namely that it would be best if it became part of Indonesia. We now know, and we felt even then, that Indonesia had made up its mind quite early on that East Timor would become part of Indonesia. UDT and Fretland were recognised by everyone really as the 2 dominant forces in Timor in that early period. Again, I don't want to go into the detail here, but obviously the leaders of those 2 parties saw benefit in the idea of forming a coalition to represent a single view about what might happen in Timor's future. And so this is the formal meeting of the establishment of a coalition in very early 1975, and some key figures present in those images, that image. But sadly, for a number of reasons, not least interference from Indonesia, by August 1975, war had broken out between UDT and Fretland, which really paved the way for what was to come. Fretland, in the end, if you like, militarily defeated UDT. The last of the UDT leadership fled across the border into West Timor in late September 1975. And Fretland became effectively the de facto government of East Timor. And during that time established a very weak but nonetheless functioning organisation to control the place, or to run the place, to run the small territory, international and Australian aid organisations came into the place to distribute humanitarian aid. And there were journalists there, mainly again from Australia, able to witness what was going on. And all of those people were able to confirm that the only real problem in Timor at that time was occurring in the border area, where Indonesian forces were beginning their incursions into the territory. So we see on the top right there the first Indonesian soldier captured by Fretland forces. And we see, of course, an image of that infamous event of the death of 5 newsmen, well known here as the Balibo Five. And in the middle there at the top we see a brigade based in the northern coastal town of Atabai, which came under Indonesian attack in November. And the Indonesian attack and takeover of Atabai prompted this event, that is, a decision to declare independence in the hope of gaining some international support. The Portuguese had effectively abandoned Timor, had thought, if I may, just to read Jill Jolliffe's account of this event, as it is the event that we're marking. So I'm just going to read a few fragments from Jill, who was, at that time, admittedly, even to us, learning to be a journalist, she would have said. Anyway, let me just read these fragments. The mood in Dili was celebratory but tense last night following the Fretland Party's unilateral declaration of independence. In a ceremony at 5:55 last night, that was she's writing on the following day, Javier do Amaral proclaimed the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. Some 2,500 people assembled in the square outside the former government admin building and observed the lowering of the Portuguese flag and the raising of the new flag of the independent state. The ceremony marked the end of over 400 years of Portuguese rule. The ceremony proclaimed Xavier do Amaral President of the new republic. The flag raising was followed by 1 minute of silence for the heroes who have died. The ceremony concluded with a 21-gun salute, followed by scenes of people embracing, weeping and singing and shouting slogans. I just thought it was good to have that little eyewitness account of the event itself. It was, as we all know, followed very quickly by the main Indonesian invasion, preceded by a green light from President Ford and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who were there just prior to the invasion on December the 7th. I'm not going to talk anything about the occupation we just know that those, apart from Indonesia making quite a hash of its first invasion force, it gradually assumed military control of Timor over the following 3 or 4 years. East Timor was then cut off, and the only way of communicating directly with Timor at that time was through a radio link established between Fretland before the invasion and members of the Campaign for Independent East Timor, which had created itself in 1975. AETA was formed on the 7th of December 1975, as noted, but it didn't just come out of the blue either. A lot had gone on before that during the course of 1975, leading up to a decision in late November at a meeting at which José Ramos Horta and Alarico Fernandez were present to establish what they decided would be called the Australian East Timor Association. As we know, it had set the meeting date for the 7th of December by coincidence, and then changed the name slightly by acclamation to the Australia East Timor Association. I wanted to put up a photo of a few of the individuals who were active in AETA at that time, and there are quite a few people for whom I didn't have photographs, so they crack a mention as initials. So Andrew Hewitt, JR, I can't tell you who that is right now, Richard Tanner, Helen Hill, of course, the late Helen Hill, Ian Bell, no longer with us either. Yeah, JW is me. I don't know who the other two boys are. But anyway, sorry, I'll come back to it. Where's Arnott is WA. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Come back to it later. I've got here some early records of AETA meetings, which will be available for perusal after the meeting. This was, for me, the best icon of the early AETA attempts to make their presence felt. This was actually a very successful rally of about 1,500 people very early in 1976, and you can see some key people there, not least Bill Roberts behind the R of Solidarity, who was the first chairperson of AETA. There are other AETA members there too. Richard is going to reflect on all of this stuff, but I think it's fair to say that we, as a solidarity organisation, did all the standard things that solidarity organisations did, and the minutes will show you the sorts of things that we tried to do. Fretland was represented outside of Timor by half a dozen members of a formal external delegation. We didn't see a lot of them, not least because the Australian government banned them coming to Australia in 1976, and it wasn't until 1983 that they were freely able to come back in. So these young men, and I want to emphasise just how, I think this tells you how young they were really, had a huge responsibility representing the country all around the world. Sadly, divisions started to show up within this small group of people in about 1977, ending in a really quite disastrous conflict in 1978, which we heard very little or nothing about at the time. The same thing had happened to the resistance in Timor itself. From 1977, the first signs of problems came with the demotion or the expulsion of Xavier do Amaral as a member of Fretland and as president. And this is a picture of him being rescued or freed by Indonesian forces after having been kept in a hole for 12 months by Fretland for his crimes. That was the first sign. The much bigger sign was the loss of radio contact with East Timor through what was described by a significant person at the time, Dennis Brini, a major presence in the activist world at that time, as the great betrayal. There's still a lot to be discovered about those events, but nonetheless, they told us that things were not going well in the resistance in that time. And then finally, at the end of 1978, the last day of 1978, the universally acclaimed leader, Nicolau Lobato, was hunted down and killed by Indonesian forces. So by the end of 78, things were not looking good. They were looking very bad. And in fact, we didn't really hear directly from the resistance for another 3 or 4 years. And it's also fair to say that at this time, things were in quite some disarray within AETA. That had also emerged in 1977, became very obvious, and was probably put aside by the end of 1978, but even AETA struggled for a couple of years to sort of get its feet back on the floor. I'm going to end now with this very hopeful, colourful picture. It looked bad then, but the story re-emerged. The activism re-emerged. The resistance re-emerged in Timor. Having told a really what seemed to be a sad ending story, it didn't stop there, and that's the note that I want to end on. Thank you.